I held the gift box in my lap, as if it were a fragile piece of my own heart. The paper was simple, nothing glossy or metallic like the others stacked on the table near the reception hall, but every crease had been folded with care. Inside was a handmade quilt I had spent weeks sewing, each square cut from fabrics that held memories of my childhood with Daniel. Old shirts, faded curtains, even a strip from the blanket he used to wrap around his shoulders on cold winter nights. It wasn't expensive, not by anyone's standards, but it carried the weight of time, effort, and love. As I sat in the car staring at it, a knot of fear twisted in my stomach. Would Daniel understand the meaning? Or would he, like everyone else, see only its lack of sparkle? Walking into the lavish venue, my breath caught. Chandeliers spilled light like waterfalls, polished marble floors reflected gowns and tuxedos, and laughter carried easily across the grand space. Vanessa's family had spared no expense, clearly determined to prove their wealth to every guest present. I clutched my modestly wrapped package tighter, my palms damp with sweat. All around me, the table for gifts groaned beneath mountains of extravagant boxes, designer logos printed proudly across ribbons. My quilt, folded carefully and wrapped in brown paper tied with a simple ribbon, looked like an intruder in a world where only price tags mattered. Daniel greeted me briefly, his smile quick and distracted, as though he were already pulled in 1,000 directions. "Madeline, you came," he said, giving me a rushed hug before turning back toward the endless parade of guests. It stung, not because I didn't expect it, but because once upon a time, I had been the center of his world, the little sister who patched his wounds when our father lashed out, the one who hid food so he wouldn't go hungry. Now, I was just another face in a crowd of people competing for his attention. My gift felt heavier in my arms. The ceremony passed like a blur. Vanessa glowed in her gown, every detail screaming wealth and perfection. When they exchanged vows, I tried to focus on Daniel's happiness, but all I could see was the way Vanessa's eyes glittered, not with love, but with triumph, as if marrying him was a prize, a step upward on some invisible ladder. I reminded myself that this was his day, not mine, and swallowed the bitterness forming at the back of my throat. Still, when applause erupted, I couldn't shake the chill crawling up my spine. It wasn't until later, during the gift opening, that the true sting came. Vanessa picked up my modest package, raising an eyebrow before tearing the paper in exaggerated slowness. When the quilt unfolded in her manicured hands, she tilted her head, smirking. "Is this handmade?" she asked loudly, her voice dripping with mockery. Laughter bubbled around the room like champagne, cruel and sharp. "How quaint. Is that all you could afford?" she added, pretending to stifle a giggle. My cheeks burned as dozens of eyes turned toward me, some pitying, most amused. Daniel said nothing. He stood behind Vanessa, his smile faltering for a brief second, then quickly restored as though he feared breaking the illusion of perfection. That silence cut deeper than Vanessa's laughter. For years I had been his shield, his ally, his family, when no one else had cared. And now, when it mattered most, he let me stand alone in the middle of a crowd that devoured my humiliation like dessert. My throat tightened, but I forced myself not to cry. Crying would only give them more to laugh at. I remembered the long night stitching that quilt by lamplight, my fingers aching as I pieced together scraps of fabric that each told a story. The square from Daniel's soccer jersey, the one he had torn during the championship game we both thought he'd never forget. The strip of our mother's apron, the one she wore when she made soup on cold nights before she left us. Every stitch had been a whisper of loyalty, of love, of memory. To have it reduced to a joke in front of strangers left me hollow. But underneath that hollow space, something else began to grow. It started as a flicker, a small flame sparked by years of being overlooked, dismissed, and underestimated. They didn't know what I knew, what I held in my pocket of influence. They laughed because they thought I was powerless. They didn't know the catering company had been booked through me, that without my card, none of them would be feasting at this glittering table. As Vanessa held the quilt aloft like a spectacle, I clenched my fists and made a silent promise to myself. This humiliation would not go unanswered. The laughter still rang in my ears long after Vanessa placed my quilt back on the table like it was a rag. I stood there, frozen, a faint smile fixed to my lips, the kind you wear when you refuse to let anyone see your pain. But inside, I was burning. My chest tightened with every mocking glance, every whisper that floated around the table. "Cheap," I heard one woman mutter under her breath, and her companion chuckled as though mocking me were a form of entertainment. I wanted to scream at all of them, to tell them they had no idea what that quilt represented. But my voice, caught between grief and fury, would not come out. Daniel's eyes flickered toward me only once, and the look was fleeting. Apologetic, maybe, but it wasn't enough. He didn't defend me, didn't take the microphone to remind everyone of the bond we once shared, didn't tell Vanessa to watch her cruel tongue. He just stood there, as though his silence was the easiest way to keep peace on his wedding day. That betrayal was a wound I hadn't expected. I realized, with a bitter taste in my mouth, that perhaps I was no longer his family in the way I had once been. Vanessa had taken that place, and her mockery had been a warning shot. I didn't belong here anymore. The rest of the gift opening became a blur. Golden watches, designer handbags, diamond-encrusted pens. Each gift was celebrated with applause and admiration, each one a shining example of wealth paraded like trophies. My quilt was forgotten as quickly as it had been ridiculed, but the laughter still lingered, hanging around me like a stain I couldn't scrub away. I sat in the back, my hands shaking slightly as I clasped them together. Every so often, a guest would glance in my direction, their smirk betraying the thought they didn't dare voice aloud. She should have known better. I remembered the little girl I once was, the one who held Daniel's hand as we ran down the street barefoot, fleeing from the sound of our father's anger. I remembered sitting with him on the floor of our tiny bedroom, piecing together scraps of fabric from old clothes to make makeshift blankets when the heater broke. That was why I had made the quilt, not because I couldn't afford something grand, but because I thought he would remember too. I thought he would look at it and see our survival stitched into every line, the history of who we were before the glittering chandeliers and fake smiles. Instead, he let them laugh at me as though those memories meant nothing. Dinner was announced soon after, and the crowd shuffled toward the dining hall, their chatter bubbling like champagne flutes clinking together. I walked slower than the others, my thoughts heavy and bitter, each step pressing the humiliation deeper into my bones. When the scent of roasted lamb and garlic butter filled the air, I paused, a strange thought forming at the edge of my mind. The catering. I had handled it all, every detail, from the tasting menu to the wine selection. Vanessa's family had claimed they'd handle payment, but when their bank card was declined at the final stage, who stepped in to keep Daniel from panicking? Me. My card, my money, my signature had secured this night. I sat down at my assigned table, pushing the napkin onto my lap with stiff fingers. The guests were loud, eager for the feast, while waiters glided between tables like dancers carrying silver trays. My humiliation simmered beneath my calm facade, but with each clink of cutlery and pop of a cork, the flame inside me grew hotter. They thought I was powerless. They thought they could laugh and move on as though I were nothing. But I knew the truth, and the truth was simple. This entire room was eating on my dime. Without me, there would be no dinner, no wine, no golden centerpieces. The thought filled me with a dangerous kind of calm. I leaned back in my chair, watching as Vanessa raised a glass of champagne, laughing brightly as though the world revolved around her. My brother stood beside her, his hand lightly resting on hers, his face glowing with pride. Pride for her, pride for this display, pride for a world that had cost me everything. I gripped the edge of the tablecloth, inhaling slowly. They had embarrassed me, stripped me of dignity in front of everyone I knew. But what they didn't realize was that the power they thought they owned could be taken away in a single whisper from me. The waiter placed a plate before me, steam rising from perfectly seared fish, delicate and flawless. My stomach churned, not from hunger, but from the storm gathering in my chest. My humiliation had transformed into something sharper, colder. I knew what I was going to do. As laughter and music filled the air, I made a silent vow to myself. This wasn't over. They might laugh at my gift, but before the night was over, they would all see the cost of their mockery. The tables would turn, literally. The dining hall sparkled with chandeliers, each crystal refracting light that made the room feel like it belonged in some fairy tale. Guests chatted loudly, clinking glasses, oblivious to the storm that brewed quietly at one corner of the table. Me. I tried to keep my hands steady as I lifted my glass of water, pretending to sip, though my throat was too tight to swallow. Vanessa's laugh rose above the chatter, a grating sound that seemed to follow me wherever I looked. It was almost unbearable, knowing she had stripped me of my dignity and walked away without consequence. I watched her closely, studying the way she leaned into Daniel as though he were a crown she had won. Every gesture was calculated. The tilt of her head, the sparkle of her earrings, the dramatic way she brushed her hair back when others looked her way. She thrived on attention, the kind that wasn't earned but demanded, and the guests gave it willingly. They adored her charm, her beauty, her ability to dominate a room without ever lifting her voice. But I saw through her mask. I knew the cruel twist beneath her smile, the poison hidden in her words. I had tasted it firsthand, and it still stung. The waiters moved with precision, carrying plates layered with food that looked like art: roasted lamb, truffle mashed potatoes, glazed carrots cut into delicate ribbons. I should have been proud, knowing I had chosen every dish, every pairing, every flavor that now delighted the guests. But pride was drowned by the sting of humiliation. This was my contribution, unseen, unacknowledged, overshadowed by their laughter. It struck me then. They were savoring the very thing I had given them, even as they mocked the gift I had laid at Daniel's feet, and the irony of it sliced deeper than Vanessa's words. Daniel raised his glass, his voice booming with gratitude, thanking the guests for joining his special day. He smiled at Vanessa, as though she were the answer to every prayer he had ever whispered, his eyes filled with admiration I once thought belonged to our bond as siblings. "To new beginnings," he said, lifting his champagne. The guests echoed him, their glasses raised high, their cheer filling the hall. I lifted mine too, but silently, my eyes never leaving his face. Did he even see me anymore? Or had I become invisible, erased from the story of his new life? The sound of forks scraping against plates filled the hall as the feast officially began. Vanessa glanced toward me briefly, her lips curling into a smirk that only I seemed to catch. It wasn't just triumph, it was dismissal, a reminder that she had won, and I was merely a guest tolerated at the edge of her spotlight. My cheeks burned, and I forced myself to look away, staring instead at the food I couldn't bring myself to eat. Every bite they took felt like a knife twisting deeper into me, reminding me of all I had sacrificed to make this evening perfect for Daniel. I thought back to the day I finalized the catering payment. The caterer's voice had been apologetic, hesitant, explaining that Vanessa's card had failed, and asking if there was another method. Without hesitation, I had stepped in. I didn't even think twice about it. I only thought of Daniel. I told myself it was worth it, that my brother deserved a flawless wedding, even if no one knew the effort it took from me. But now, sitting in this glittering hall filled with judgment and mockery, I realized I had paid for their laughter. And suddenly, the weight of that irony crushed me. As the laughter grew louder, and the clinking of silverware filled the air, I reached into my clutch, my fingers brushing against the phone tucked inside. My heart began to pound, as a dangerous idea rooted itself more firmly in my mind. All it would take was one call, one quiet instruction, and everything would change. The caterers were under my contract, my payment. They answered to me. If I told them to stop, to pack up, to walk away, they would obey. I had the power to bring this perfect dinner crashing down around Vanessa's glittering facade. I leaned back in my chair, the corners of my lips twitching as if at a private joke. For the first time that evening, I felt the tide shift. Not in the room, not in their laughter, but within me. They thought they had won, but I was holding the card they didn't even know existed. I could burn this illusion of perfection to the ground with nothing more than a whispered word. And though part of me still hesitated, still longed for Daniel to defend me, another part, the part that had been humiliated, dismissed, and mocked, was already preparing for war. I sat frozen, my phone heavy in my hand, like it carried the fate of the entire evening. Around me, people laughed, oblivious to the battle raging behind my still face. Vanessa's voice carried across the table, sweet as honey to everyone else, but I heard the venom in every syllable. "It's just so wonderful when everyone brings thoughtful gifts," she said, glancing in my direction. The guest chuckled lightly, unaware of the dagger behind her words. My fingers tightened around the phone. This wasn't just mockery. It was deliberate cruelty, and Daniel still didn't see it. Daniel leaned in to kiss her temple, smiling as though her words were innocent, affectionate even. The sight of it carved a hollow ache in my chest. This was my brother, the boy who once defended me from bullies in middle school, who would never let anyone speak to me with cruelty. Yet here he was, blind to the way his new bride sliced me open with every remark. My eyes burned, but I refused to let tears fall. Not here. Not in front of them. They wouldn't get the satisfaction of seeing me break. Instead, I pressed my nails into my palm, forcing myself into silence. The waiters carried in more trays, the food arriving like a parade of wealth and luxury. Laughter swelled louder. Glasses clinked. The hall shimmered with a happiness that excluded me. My thoughts tangled, torn between love for my brother and fury at the woman beside him. I wanted to scream, to tell everyone how Vanessa's card had bounced, how this lavish meal existed because of me, not her. But no, words wouldn't be enough. Words could be denied, twisted, laughed away. Actions, however, had a finality no one could argue with. My heart pounded with the realization. This was my moment. I remembered the way Vanessa looked at me when I handed over that framed photograph, her lips curling as if she had tasted something bitter. It wasn't just about the gift. It was about erasing me. She wanted me small, humiliated, insignificant, so that Daniel's world revolved only around her. And in that moment, something inside me hardened. I couldn't let her win so easily. Not when I held the one thing that could shatter the illusion she had so carefully built for this wedding. The phone in my hand was no longer a burden. It was a weapon. I stood abruptly, pushing my chair back with a scrape that drew a few curious glances. "Excuse me," I muttered, slipping away from the table before anyone could question me. My heels clicked against the polished floor as I stepped into the quieter hallway outside. The air felt cooler here, calmer, but inside me, everything was on fire. I stared at my phone for a long moment, my thumb hovering over the screen. Then, with one deep breath, I dialed the catering manager's number. My voice, when it came, was calm and steady, though my heart thundered in my chest. "Pack everything up," I told him. There was a pause, a moment of confusion. "Yes," I confirmed, my voice sharper now, firm with finality. "Clear the tables. Stop the service. I don't care what stage dinner is at. Leave the room. Now." The line went quiet, and then he agreed. I hung up, slipping the phone back into my clutch with trembling hands. My pulse raced, adrenaline coursing through me, but there was also a strange calmness. I had pulled the trigger. The moment was set in motion, and there was no going back. I lingered in the hallway for a moment, steadying myself, before walking back into the dining hall. Everything looked the same, the laughter, the music, the glittering lights, but I saw it differently now. Every guest smiling with a fork halfway to their mouth had no idea what was about to unfold. Vanessa sat radiant, basking in the glow of admiration, sipping her champagne as though she were untouchable. My lips curved into the smallest of smiles. In just a few minutes, her flawless facade would begin to crack, and she wouldn't even know where the blow had come from. As I took my seat again, Daniel leaned toward me briefly. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, his voice edged with genuine concern. For a fleeting second, I almost faltered, almost confessed everything right there. But I looked into his kind eyes, then at Vanessa's smug smile, and the answer came clear. "I'm fine," I said, forcing a small smile. Inside, I was anything but fine. Inside, I was a storm waiting to break, and soon, every single person in that hall would feel its force. The first sign that something was wrong came quietly, almost imperceptibly. A few waiters began moving across the hall, not with trays of steaming food, but with empty hands and downcast eyes. At first, I thought no one would notice. After all, the music was still playing. Glasses were still raised. But then a server leaned across a table, lifting a plate still half full and carrying it swiftly away. A woman at that table blinked in confusion, her fork raised mid-air. "Excuse me, I wasn't finished," she called out. But the server didn't stop. More waiters appeared, moving in rhythm like shadows, clearing food with silent urgency. Vanessa frowned, her perfect brow furrowing for the first time all evening. "What on earth is happening?" she muttered, glancing at Daniel. He looked equally puzzled, leaning back in his chair, as though to make sense of the sudden disruption. All around us, murmurs began to spread, forks clinking against empty plates as guests tried to salvage their meals, only to have them snatched away. The rich aroma of roasted meats and seasoned vegetables that had filled the hall was suddenly replaced by the harsh scrape of cutlery against porcelain, followed by silence. At first, people laughed nervously, assuming it was a mix-up, a mistake in the kitchen. "Maybe the staff are confused," someone said at a nearby table. But then, an entire tray of untouched appetizers was swept away, leaving one man staring at his empty glass and barren tablecloth. The laughter grew uneasy, strained, until it dissolved into irritation. Vanessa's smile faltered, the corners of her mouth twitching in disbelief. She raised her hand to flag down a waiter, but they avoided her gaze deliberately, their pace brisk, their movements relentless. It was as though the room had been hijacked by some invisible force. Daniel finally stood, his voice raised. "Excuse me, can someone explain what's happening?" The music dimmed slightly, guests turning toward him, their own confusion growing. A waiter paused, looked directly at him, then shifted his eyes toward me before walking away without a word. My pulse hammered in my throat, but I kept my expression calm, my eyes lowered as if I were just as bewildered as the rest. I felt Vanessa's gaze burning into me, sharp and suspicious, but I didn't flinch. Not yet. This was only the beginning. The waiters moved faster now, entire tables stripped bare within minutes. Plates vanished, glasses emptied, trays whisked away with unnerving efficiency. Guests whispered, some demanding explanations, others growing indignant. "Is this a joke?" a woman snapped. "I paid for a hotel room to be here, and this is how you serve dinner?" A man beside her slammed his fist lightly on the table. Vanessa's face flushed crimson, her fingers clutching her champagne flute so tightly I thought it might shatter. Daniel tried to calm her, but his own frustration was showing. And then, like the final note of a symphony, the last tray disappeared. The tables gleamed bare, centerpieces standing awkwardly like forgotten ornaments in the middle of the chaos. A heavy silence fell, broken only by the distant hum of the kitchen doors closing. No food, no drinks. Nothing left but hungry, bewildered guests staring at one another as if reality itself had betrayed them. Vanessa rose from her chair in disbelief, her voice shrill as she demanded answers. "This is my wedding dinner. Who authorized this?" Her scream echoed, ricocheting off the chandeliers, and I felt the tiniest thrill run down my spine. Daniel stepped forward, his voice commanding now. "Can someone please explain what's happening?" he demanded again, but this time there was no answer. The staff had disappeared, their retreat silent and complete, leaving only the stunned crowd behind. Vanessa's hands shook as she grabbed Daniel's arm. "This is humiliating," she hissed, loud enough for those nearest to hear. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the tables, but with them came suspicion. Suspicion about money, planning, and responsibility. Guests turned to each other, questioning, whispering, wondering how such an extravagant event could unravel so spectacularly. I sat perfectly still, my heart racing, but my face serene. This was the storm I had unleashed, and there was no stopping it now. All eyes were shifting toward Vanessa, their admiration curdling into judgment. She who had bragged about wealth, about perfection, was now standing powerless in front of 100 guests with empty plates and unanswered questions. I let myself breathe slowly, evenly, knowing that the moment of revelation was drawing near, but not yet. Let them stew in their confusion. Let Vanessa sweat under the weight of her own collapsing image. The night had only just begun. Vanessa's voice cut through the silence like shattered glass, high and desperate, trembling at the edges. "This is ridiculous. I want the manager here, now," she barked, but her authority fell flat. No one rushed to obey her. The guests stared. Their earlier laughter turned into a cold hush of judgment. She was no longer the radiant bride who commanded attention with her glittering gown and perfected smile. She was a woman unraveling, exposed under the glare of too many eyes. Daniel tried to steady her, whispering something in her ear, but she shoved his hand away, panic spreading across her face. People began murmuring louder, leaning across empty tables. "Wasn't this supposed to be catered by the best company in town?" a woman asked. "They bragged about it nonstop." Another muttered, "How do you run out of food at a wedding this size?" The whispers had venom, and Vanessa could hear every word. Her cheeks burned as she spun on Daniel, her voice sharp enough to slice through the crowd. "You said everything was taken care of. Do you even know what's going on?" He froze, caught between defending himself and protecting her pride. For the first time that night, he looked helpless. I watched quietly, my hands folded neatly in my lap, my expression composed. No one suspected me, not yet, and I relished the delicious irony of it all. Just hours ago, they had mocked me, laughed at the gift I had poured my heart into, dismissing me as cheap, as unworthy of their high society. Now, the tables, quite literally, were empty, and so was the foundation of Vanessa's carefully curated world. She thrived on appearances, on spectacle, and I had taken that away with the flick of a hidden signature. The silence of my triumph tasted sweeter than any toast could, but Vanessa couldn't keep still. She stomped toward the head table, her gown trailing clumsily behind her. She grabbed the microphone meant for speeches and tapped it violently, the screeching feedback making several guests flinch. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, forcing her voice into brittle authority. "There's been a slight mix-up with the staff. Dinner will resume shortly. Please, remain calm." Her words, though sharp, carried no weight. They sounded like excuses, like empty promises spat into a void of disbelief. Guests exchanged glances, unimpressed, their patience thinning by the second. An older man near the front, one of Daniel's business colleagues, spoke loudly enough to be heard over the murmurs. "Mix-up? At a wedding this size? This looks more like negligence." His tone dripped with disdain, and others quickly nodded in agreement. Vanessa's eyes widened, panic flashing in them. She looked to Daniel, silently pleading for him to intervene, but he remained frozen, his jaw tight. Every guest's eye was now on her, waiting for answers she didn't have, peeling away her polished mask. The spotlight she craved so much had become a cruel, scorching flame. Daniel finally cleared his throat, stepping forward with the microphone. "Please, everyone, let's give the staff time to fix this," he said, his voice calm but strained. There must have been a mistake with the service schedule, but the attempt at diplomacy fell flat. The staff wasn't coming back, because I had made sure they wouldn't. And Daniel, though steady, didn't carry the authority Vanessa did. People respected him, but they didn't fear him. The questions weren't aimed at him. They were aimed at her, the bride who promised perfection, and was now drowning in the humiliation of failure. The air grew thick with discontent. Some guests began rising from their seats, shaking their heads, muttering about wasted time. A few even made their way toward the exit, muttering that they hadn't traveled just to leave hungry. Vanessa's desperation sharpened, her voice breaking as she snapped at them. "Sit down! You're not going anywhere!" she cried, but the command sounded pitiful, almost childish. A bride begging her guest to stay was a scene no one expected, and it only deepened the humiliation. She had built her reputation on control, and now control was slipping from her grasp like sand through fingers. From where I sat, I could feel the shift in the air. The laughter from earlier had become whispers of pity, then disdain. Vanessa was collapsing in slow motion, her glittering world fracturing under the weight of empty plates and sharp stares. I could have ended it then, could have stood up and taken credit for the storm I unleashed, but I chose patience. The best revenge was not in the strike itself, but in the unraveling afterward, the way her mask peeled off layer by layer, leaving her exposed and raw before the very people she sought to impress. And I wasn't done yet. Daniel's attempt at calm couldn't mask the growing chaos. People had begun taking out their phones, dialing restaurants nearby, laughing bitterly at the absurdity of it all. A wedding of this magnitude, collapsing because the food disappeared. It was the kind of story that would spread like wildfire. Vanessa could sense it, the sting of gossip already forming in hushed voices. She clutched the microphone again, her hand trembling, as though sheer force of will could keep her crumbling empire together. Her voice cracked when she said, "No one is leaving. This is my wedding, and it will continue." The desperation in her tone rang louder than her words. I leaned back, almost amused, though beneath the surface a storm churned. For years I had swallowed their belittlement, their cutting remarks that masked themselves as jokes. Vanessa especially thrived on pushing me down, positioning herself as superior in every way. Tonight had simply been the culmination of all those tiny humiliations, a symphony of cruelty answered at last with justice. Yet, as I looked around the room, at the guests shifting uncomfortably, at Daniel's pale face, I wondered if justice was always supposed to feel this heavy. A strange twinge of guilt whispered at the edges of my triumph. A woman I didn't know, perhaps one of Vanessa's friends, raised her voice. "You bragged about every detail for months, Vanessa. You mocked other weddings, claimed yours would be unforgettable. Well, congratulations. It is unforgettable, but not for the reasons you hoped." The words landed like a slap, and several guests chuckled bitterly. Vanessa froze, her face paling under the soft glow of chandeliers. She had always been the queen of the room, but now she was the jester, forced to wear a crown of shame. I could see her mascara smudging, black streaks betraying her inner unraveling. Daniel's father, stern and sharp-eyed, rose from his chair. "This is disgraceful," he said, his voice carrying authority. "Our family has a reputation to uphold, Daniel. How could this happen under your watch?" He didn't even acknowledge Vanessa, as though she wasn't worthy of being addressed. Daniel opened his mouth, searching for excuses, but no explanation came. His eyes darted toward me, briefly, as if seeking help, or maybe searching for an anchor. It was fleeting, but in that second, I wondered if he knew, if he sensed my quiet hand orchestrating this collapse. The tension grew unbearable. Some guests left outright, shaking their heads, whispering about refunds on expensive gifts. The noise in the hall was no longer celebratory. It was sharp, buzzing with scorn. Vanessa, still clinging to the microphone, suddenly shouted, "It's not my fault. Someone sabotaged this." Her wild eyes scanned the room, desperate to assign blame, to shift the humiliation onto another. For a breathless moment, her gaze locked onto me, lingering just long enough to spark suspicion. The corner of her mouth twitched, and I knew. She was starting to put the pieces together. But Daniel shook his head, his voice firm, silencing her paranoia. "Stop, Vanessa. Don't start throwing accusations. We don't even know what happened yet." His words were measured, but there was exhaustion in them, like the weight of carrying her chaos had finally begun to crush him. Vanessa tried to protest, but he snatched the microphone from her hands. "Enough." The single word echoed louder than her frantic rambling. The room went silent, eyes widening, because for the first time that night, Daniel wasn't protecting her. He was standing against her. I could feel the shift in energy. Vanessa stumbled back, her shoulders heaving, her authority stripped away. The guests watched, fascinated, like witnesses to a scandalous play unraveling in real time. My brother's jaw tightened, his eyes hardening with a kind of quiet clarity I hadn't seen before. Maybe he wasn't as blind to her cruelty as I once thought. Maybe tonight was opening his eyes in ways I hadn't expected. The thought unsettled me, because it meant the chaos I unleashed might have consequences far beyond my revenge. Still, I remained silent, cloaked in composure. The gift I had given, mocked so cruelly, sat untouched on the table like a silent witness to the truth. None of them knew that the missing meals, the vanishing catering staff, the unraveling dignity of the bride, they were all tied to me. But soon, Vanessa would put the final pieces together. I could see it in the way her eyes flicked back to me, venom and suspicion swirling. The storm I had summoned was no longer under my control. It was about to name me as its creator. Vanessa's composure finally shattered. She grabbed the microphone back with trembling hands, her voice sharp enough to slice through the heavy silence. "It was her," she cried, pointing a manicured finger straight at me. Gasps filled the room as every head turned in my direction, their faces painted with shock, curiosity, and something darker, hunger for scandal. Vanessa's voice rose, shrill with desperation. "Madeline, you've always hated me, always envied me. Don't think I didn't notice you smirking when the food vanished. Admit it. You planned this." The accusation hung in the air like smoke, choking the atmosphere. My heart pounded, but I didn't flinch. Years of swallowing humiliation had prepared me for this moment. I stood slowly, letting the room take me in. "Do you really think I'd waste my time on you, Vanessa?" I asked, my tone calm, deliberate. A ripple of murmurs ran through the crowd. I wanted to shake her, to scream the truth, but something in me held back. This wasn't about spectacle. It was about dignity, about reclaiming the power they had stolen from me with every cruel laugh, every backhanded comment. Still, the temptation to reveal everything simmered close to the surface. Daniel looked between us, his brow furrowed. "Vanessa, stop. You're humiliating yourself." His words struck her harder than my composure ever could. She turned on him, eyes wide with betrayal. "You're defending her? After what she did to us? After she ruined our wedding?" Her voice cracked into something childlike, fragile, but there was venom underneath. Guests shifted in their chairs, some shaking their heads, others leaning forward eagerly, waiting for the truth to spill out. For the first time, it wasn't me on trial. It was them. I let a bitter smile curve my lips. "Ruined your wedding? Vanessa, your cruelty did that long before tonight." A stunned hush fell over the room. My voice grew stronger with each word. "Do you think I didn't hear your laughter when I gave my gift? Do you think people didn't notice how you've treated me for years? You wanted tonight to be about your perfection. Well, congratulations. It is. Every guest here has now seen who you really are." My chest rose and fell heavily, but I kept my gaze locked on hers. Vanessa staggered back, mascara streaking down her face. She wanted to argue, to spit back another insult, but the silence of the room weighed her down. Even her closest friends avoided her eyes, unwilling to share in her downfall. Daniel's father's face was grim, and I saw the calculation in his eyes. He was already deciding how this disaster would affect their family's reputation. Vanessa was unraveling, and no one was reaching out to catch her. It was the exact opposite of the queen-like image she'd tried so desperately to project. But then came the part I didn't expect. Daniel stepped closer to me, his expression unreadable. "Madeline," he said softly, his voice carrying only for me but loud enough for everyone to hear. "Tell me the truth. Was it you?" The room froze. Dozens of eyes bore into me, waiting. I felt my throat tighten, my carefully guarded secret pressing against my chest like a blade. He wasn't accusing me. He was pleading. I could see the hurt in his eyes, the silent plea of a brother caught between loyalty and love, and it made my stomach twist. I looked around the hall, the sneering guests, the abandoned plates, the gift that sat ignored yet mocking. All of it had led to this moment. I could deny it, protect my secret, and let Vanessa spiral into her own destruction. Or I could confess, pull the veil back and let them all see what happens when years of cruelty finally reach a breaking point. My palms grew damp, my heartbeat a relentless drum. For the first time I realized that this wasn't just about Vanessa. It was about me, about my voice, about choosing to stop being silent. Drawing in a long, trembling breath, I steadied myself. My voice was calm, but every syllable cracked with truth. "Yes," I said, letting the words slice through the heavy silence. "It was me. I paid for the catering. I canceled it. I wanted you all to feel, just for one night, what it's like to be humiliated, mocked, and dismissed." The collective gasp was deafening, as if the walls themselves inhaled the confession. Vanessa clutched her chest, staggered backward, while Daniel's expression darkened, not with anger, but with something far more complicated. And in that moment, I knew nothing in this family would ever be the same again. The room was suffocating with silence after my confession. Every eye was glued to me, some filled with disbelief, others with grudging admiration. Vanessa's mouth hung open, her face blotched red with anger and embarrassment. She wanted to scream, but no sound came out. My words had stolen the air from her lungs. I could hear the whispering ripple through the tables, guests leaning toward one another, eager to dissect the scandal as if it were entertainment rather than my reality. It struck me then that in their eyes, I had finally become more than invisible. I was unforgettable. Daniel's hands clenched at his sides, his expression unreadable, but his eyes, those familiar eyes I had grown up trusting, were stormy with emotions I couldn't decipher. He took a slow step toward me, and the crowd seemed to part unconsciously, giving him a path. "Why, Madeline?" he asked quietly, his voice trembling, not with anger, but with heartbreak. "Why did you feel you had to do this?" His voice wasn't condemning. It was begging for understanding. My chest tightened because I knew the truth would hurt him even more than it already had. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to meet his gaze. "Because no one ever listened to me, Daniel. Not you, not Mom, not Dad. When she mocked me tonight, it was the last straw. All of you were going to sit there, laugh along with her, and let me carry that shame alone. So I made sure you couldn't ignore me this time." My words cut through the air like a blade. Guests shifted in discomfort, some staring at their laps, ashamed that they had indeed laughed, or at the very least, hadn't stopped it. For the first time, the mirror of guilt was turned on all of them. Vanessa finally found her voice, shrieking across the room. "You selfish witch! You think this is about you? You humiliated me on my wedding day, in front of everyone who matters. You've destroyed everything." Her voice was hoarse, wild, as if she were clawing at the last remnants of her perfect image. Daniel turned sharply to her, his patience thinning. "Enough, Vanessa." His tone was firm, colder than I had ever heard it. She froze, blinking at him as if he'd struck her. He had never spoken to her that way, not once. The guests looked on, fascinated, sensing a fracture. I took a step closer to Daniel, lowering my voice, though everyone could hear. "Do you know what it's like to spend your life in someone else's shadow? To give, and give, and give, only to be mocked when you finally offer a piece of yourself? That gift I brought you, it wasn't cheap or meaningless. I worked on it for months. It was made with love, Daniel." And she laughed at it. I glanced at Vanessa, whose face was now twisted into disbelief. My brother's face softened, his shoulders slumping under the weight of my words. He knew I wasn't lying. For the first time since the chaos began, I saw doubt in his eyes. Not doubt of me, but doubt of her. Daniel looked at his bride, studying her as if he were seeing her for the first time without the veil of infatuation. "Vanessa, did you laugh at her?" His voice was steady, but it carried the force of judgment. Vanessa's lips trembled. "It was just a joke." Everyone laughed. She gestured wildly at the guests, but the very people she pointed to shifted uncomfortably, unwilling to meet her eyes. In that moment, she realized the crowd had turned against her. She was alone. Daniel's jaw tightened. "It wasn't a joke. It was cruel. And you knew it." His voice was laced with quiet fury. Vanessa sputtered, searching for an excuse, but none came. I watched the cracks form in their perfect facade, the illusion of love and unity collapsing before everyone's eyes. It should have felt like victory, but instead, a hollow ache filled my chest. This wasn't about triumph. It was about truth, and the truth was far messier than revenge could ever predict. My hands trembled as I wondered if I had gone too far. My mother rose from her seat then, her face pale but resolute. "Madeline," she whispered, stepping toward me. She looked torn between shame and pride, her eyes shimmering with tears. "Why didn't you ever tell us how much you were hurting?" The question pierced me, and for a moment my throat closed. I wanted to scream, "Because you wouldn't have listened," but instead, I let the tears brim in my eyes, refusing to let them fall. "Because I was always the quiet one, the good daughter. You never wanted to hear the truth if it disrupted the family picture." My voice cracked, but it was steady enough. Gasps echoed faintly, and the crowd sat in rapt silence as generations of wounds spilled into the open. Daniel turned back to me, his voice softer now. "Madeline, I don't know how to fix this, but I swear I didn't see it. I should have noticed, I should have defended you." The regret in his tone was raw, unpolished, and for the first time that night, my heart broke. Not for myself, but for him. He was caught between love and loyalty, shame and duty. It wasn't just Vanessa who had been exposed tonight. It was all of us. Vanessa's face hardened into something venomous. "She's manipulating you, can't you see? This has always been her plan. To ruin us. To ruin me." Her shrill voice rang across the hall, but no one seemed to believe her anymore. The guests watched her with disdain, their whispers shifting now to pity for me, the sister who had endured years of cruelty in silence. Vanessa's desperation only deepened her downfall. And then, in the middle of it all, she screamed, "If you take her side, Daniel, you'll regret it for the rest of your life." Her words echoed with a threat that silenced even the whispers. Daniel looked at her then, really looked, and I saw the moment clarity struck him like lightning. His shoulders straightened, his face grew resolute, and he took a step away from Vanessa toward me. His voice rang out, firm and unshakable. "The only regret I have is not standing up for my sister sooner." The room erupted, not in laughter this time, but in stunned silence followed by scattered claps, hesitant at first, then growing. Vanessa's face crumpled as she realized what she had lost, and though my heart ached with the weight of years gone wrong, I knew one thing with certainty. This battle was no longer mine alone, but as the applause swelled and Vanessa dissolved into furious tears, I felt a pang of unease, because deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Weddings end in vows, but marriages unravel in secrets, and Vanessa, humiliated as she was, wouldn't walk away quietly. No, she would come back sharper, darker, more desperate. The real war hadn't even begun. It had only just been declared. Vanessa sat slumped in her chair, the final traces of her composure stripped away like paint peeling from an old wall. Her friends avoided her gaze, whispering amongst themselves, as if proximity might tarnish them too. Daniel stood at my side, his hand finding mine naturally, an unspoken reassurance passing between us. The guests were divided, some still shocked, some quietly admiring the audacity that had shattered the illusion of the perfect wedding. I finally felt the rush of relief I had been denying myself, a tremor of triumph tempered with the gravity of what had transpired. Every word, every calculated action, had led to this moment of reckoning. I turned to face the crowd, my voice firm but calm. This wedding was meant to celebrate love, unity, and family. And while some may have forgotten that, tonight reminded us all that cruelty and pride carry consequences. You laughed at me, dismissed me, and ignored the pain you caused. But the truth always finds a way to surface, and when it does, no one can pretend to be innocent anymore. The room went quiet again, my words hanging like a mirror in which everyone saw themselves reflected. The weight of years of humiliation lifted slightly from my shoulders. Daniel cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention. My sister didn't just make a bold statement tonight. She reminded us that respect is earned, and that silence in the face of injustice allows cruelty to thrive. I was blind for too long, but I see now. I won't let history repeat itself, not in my family, not with anyone I care about. His gaze swept across the room, landing on Vanessa with the precision of a judge pronouncing a sentence. She shrank under the scrutiny, realizing that her dominance, her carefully cultivated perfection, had crumbled in the eyes of the people she most wanted to impress. Vanessa tried to speak, to muster a defense, but no sound emerged. Her jaw worked silently, mascara-streaked eyes wide, a stark contrast to the brash, haughty figure she had projected. The room murmured, some guests whispering about her past arrogance, her relentless mockery of Madeline, and the subtle cruelties no one had openly condemned until now. For the first time, the world she controlled with laughter and status had abandoned her, and I realized that revenge, when executed with care and precision, doesn't need violence. It simply needs truth. Daniel squeezed my hand lightly, a gesture that spoke volumes. "We have a choice now," he said softly, but enough for the room to hear. "We can rebuild, acknowledge our mistakes, and honor what truly matters: family, love, and integrity. Or we can let resentment fester, letting pride rule our hearts instead of empathy." I nodded, feeling a deep warmth, knowing that the years of feeling overlooked and belittled had culminated not in bitterness, but in clarity. The truth had been a weapon, yes, but also a key, unlocking a door that had long been sealed. The wedding, once teetering on the brink of disaster, began to regain a fragile order. Guests whispered apologies to one another, some hesitant, some sincere. Daniel and I shared a brief smile, one that held the weight of understanding, forgiveness, and the bond of siblings who had weathered storms together. Vanessa, still seated, no longer possessed the power she once wielded with such ease. Tonight, she had been dethroned, not by scandal alone, but by the undeniable force of courage, honesty, and the unyielding refusal to be invisible. I stepped forward, turning my gaze on the wedding cake that remained untouched, the empty plates that once carried laughter now bearing silence. "Tonight isn't about winning or losing," I said, my voice resonating through the hall. "It's about seeing each other as we truly are, without masks, without pretense. We can choose to rise above cruelty, or continue to fall prey to it. I hope everyone here chooses wisely, because the next chapter of our lives begins with what we learn from tonight." The crowd's silence shifted subtly into murmurs of reflection, an unspoken acknowledgement that something profound had occurred. And as I stepped back beside Daniel, I finally exhaled, letting the tension melt from my shoulders. The family I had thought overlooked me now saw me, not just my gift, but my courage, my voice, my resolve. The storm of ridicule and mockery had passed, leaving clarity in its wake. And in that clarity, I understood something vital. The world cannot erase your worth unless you allow it. Tonight, my worth had been seen, my voice had been heard, and my spirit remained unbroken. If you've followed Madeline's journey from humiliation to triumph and want to witness more stories that celebrate courage, justice, and resilience, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Hit the like button if this story moved you, and stay tuned for more narratives where voices long silenced finally rise, and the truth takes center stage. Months had passed since the wedding, and the echoes of that night still resonated in my mind, like a melody I couldn't forget. The humiliation, the laughter, the chaos, all of it had transformed into a strange kind of liberation. Daniel and I had grown closer than ever, not just as siblings, but as allies who understood the unspoken depths of each other's fears and dreams. Our bond was no longer defined by shared childhood memories alone, but by surviving the storm together, by being honest and vulnerable when it mattered most. The wedding, which had once felt like a battlefield, had become the crucible in which our relationship was reforged, stronger, unbreakable. Vanessa's absence from our lives was both a relief and a reminder of the fragility of appearances. She had tried to maintain her perfection, her influence, but the humiliation had fractured the image she had spent years cultivating. Family gatherings became quieter, calmer, and for the first time, more genuine. Conversations no longer revolved around who wore the most expensive dress or whose accomplishment shone brightest. Instead, they centered on authenticity, understanding, and for the first time, listening. It was in those simple moments that I realized courage wasn't about confrontation alone. It was about creating a space where truth could breathe freely without fear of judgment. My parents, initially shocked and defensive, had undergone their own subtle transformations. My father, who had often dismissed my efforts and contributions, began to reach out more, asking for my advice, my opinion, and acknowledging my perspectives in ways he had never done before. It wasn't immediate, and it certainly wasn't perfect, but each step felt meaningful. My mother, who had been silent for so long, had learned that supporting me didn't mean erasing her own voice. It meant choosing to speak even when it was uncomfortable. Slowly, the family that had been divided by pride and misjudgment began to heal, stitch by careful stitch, recognizing that empathy and honesty could mend even the deepest wounds. Professionally, the story of the wedding, the moment I stopped the catering, the audacity and precision of that act, became a turning point in my life, not as a viral sensation, not as a spectacle, but as a personal awakening. I found myself pursuing projects and opportunities I had once thought impossible, asserting myself with a confidence that had previously been buried under years of doubt. People began to notice the quiet strength I carried, the resilience forged not in comfort, but in adversity. It was strange and exhilarating to realize that being underestimated had become my secret advantage. It allowed me to rise without the weight of expectation, unbound and unshakable. Despite the newfound clarity and progress, some days still carried shadows. I would catch myself hesitating before speaking, wondering if I had overstepped, or if the echoes of Vanessa's ridicule would find me even now. But each time, Daniel's voice, steady, grounding, unwavering, reminded me of one irrefutable truth. My worth was never defined by anyone else's opinion, and the only approval I truly needed was my own. Slowly, those moments of doubt faded, replaced by a calm certainty that came from experience, from surviving the crucible, from knowing that I had finally found my own voice, and that it was strong, fearless, and real. The family gatherings that followed were no longer dominated by appearances or competition. Laughter returned, yes, but it was softer, warmer, free of malice. Guests began to recognize the power of genuine connection over pretension, of kindness over arrogance. I watched my parents interact with me differently, with respect and consideration, a subtle shift that spoke volumes. And Daniel, my brother, my confidant, stood by my side not as a protector alone, but as a partner in navigating life's complexities, someone who had seen me at my lowest and still believed in me, unwaveringly. I also discovered a deeper appreciation for the gifts we give, beyond material value or societal expectations. The handmade gift I had brought to the wedding, once mocked and scorned, became a symbol of resilience and intention. It reminded me that the effort, thought, and love poured into something mattered far more than others' opinions, and in a way, that night had given me the courage to approach every facet of life with the same mindset, to invest fully, unapologetically, in authenticity, knowing that those who truly mattered would recognize and honor it. Vanessa, distant and fractured in her own path, became a cautionary figure rather than a continuing threat. I learned that not every enemy needed confrontation, not every slight needed retaliation. Some people, when faced with truth, dissolve under the weight of their own actions. And the lesson was clear. Integrity, patience, and courage often carry the most profound consequences. Not violence, not revenge, but the quiet power of standing tall when the world expects you to crumble. As I stood one evening on the balcony of my apartment, looking over the city lights that shimmered like tiny beacons of possibility, I felt a sense of completion. Not of vengeance, not of closure, but of liberation. The journey had been harrowing, painful, and transformative, but I had emerged stronger, wiser, and unafraid to claim my place in the world. My family, though imperfect, had begun to heal, and I had finally found my voice, the one that could no longer be ignored, mocked, or diminished. And in that voice, I carried not just my story, but the promise that no one would ever make me invisible again.